Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Hot crowd. Well, I don't know how to fix that, so. Been a hot minute since I've been up here, y'all, so y'all bear with me and fall back in the groove. That's good to see everybody tonight. We're going to be coming out of Genesis chapter 37. Just like Mr. Buddy was saying, Brother Brandon started on with the Passover, and so we're going to go back to beforehand, before the Passover ever happened, and start from the beginning. So, like I said, chapter 37 is where we're going to be at tonight, and coat of many colors. Show of hands, who has heard of the coat of many colors? All right. Who ain't? Good. All right. I want to go too deep then. As everybody flips there to it. So chapter 37, we're introduced to a man named Joseph. And kids, do y'all know who Joseph is? I know y'all heard of coat of many colors, but do y'all know who Joseph is? So Joseph was the son of a man named Jacob, and he was the next to the youngest son, right? So Jacob had 11 brothers. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I only had 3 siblings. But having 11 other siblings would be a lot to have to fight for over meals. So we see Joseph. He is the next to the youngest son of Jacob, and his daddy picked favorites, and Jacob was his. All right, so I wore the most colorful shirt that I have, and Mr. Buddy, we haven't found this somewhere, but back then, something that had multiple colors on it was deemed as something special. All right? Back then, ink, the dye to color clothing was really expensive. All right? And so in order to have something with a lot of colors on it, it cost a lot of money to make. And so we see Jacob give his next to the youngest son this special coat. Okay? Now, while that also marked him as a favorite son, it also marked him kind of like clan leadership. And back in them days, clan leadership would go to the oldest son. Who's the oldest sibling in the house tonight? Not me. Yep, so we got a handful of us, the oldest one in here. Back in them days, the oldest would take over the leadership of the clan. For better or worse, that's typically how it happened. Alright? So now, you got, of the 12 brothers, he's the next to the youngest. So you got 10 of them ahead of him that's all older. And Joseph's been marked for leadership over them and picked as a favorite. Do we think that kind of made him mad? Yeah, I'm gonna say if you was to realize that your baby brother was getting the nod over you, I think I'd be kind of upset too. You know, especially in the normal thing back then was that the oldest would be the leader anyway. So because he was his favorite of his daddy, his brothers hated him. And hate's a strong word. You know, that's not something you usually hear people talk about in its what it actually means. You know, we say, I hate school, or I hate going to the dentist. They didn't just not really like him. They wished he was dead. That's how much this kind of messed up their family whenever Jacob picked a favorite. Okay. So we see Joseph, who is his daddy's favorite, and he was kind of marked as a supervisor over his brothers. So whenever they would go out and be taking care of the sheep and their daddy's flocks, Joseph would go and probably keep tabs on them. You know, kind of make sure everything was going okay. And then he'd come back to his daddy, Jacob, and he'd tell him what was going on. And it says in verse 2, it says, and Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Alright, so now we see here that Joseph's brothers hate him, and they're also doing bad things. Alright, the Bible doesn't go into detail what they were doing, but it just says that they're evil report. Okay? So not only is Joseph now been marked as a favorite, now he's tattletelling on him. You know?
Yeah.
He's coming back and he's saying, hey, Dad, they're not doing right. You know, I don't know what you want to do about it, but hey, this is what they're doing. And you know, the Bible don't go into detail on it, but he might have had a little chip on his shoulder about it. You know, he said, well, I'm the favorite. Y'all can't touch me. And so we don't know. He maybe did, maybe didn't. It's all just speculation, but you know, he would go and tell on them. So then we go into verse 5, and this is where Joseph first starts getting his dreams. All right? So now you know he's got the coat. He's marked as a favorite son, possibly for playing leadership after his daddy passes away. And now he starts receiving these dreams from God. In verse 5 it says, and Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaf stood round about, and made obeisance unto my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, shalt thou indeed reign over us, or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. So now he gets this dream, and it makes it, sounds like in his dream that his work, the crops that he's picking, and they would bundle them up. And a sheaf would be however big they want to make them, they'd be able to stand up on a stack and dry that way. And so it said that his sheaf rose up, and all his brothers bowed down to it. Okay? Now keep in mind, they already don't like the brother. And now he's telling them that he done got a dream where what they're doing is going to pay respect to what he's doing. And so that just makes it hate him even more. Okay? So verse 9, he gets another dream. And this time it's a dream about where Joseph, all the sun, what's that, sun? The sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bow down to him again. Now this time it's not just crops that are bowing down, but now it's planets bowing down to him. Alright, so now not only is he telling the dream about not only is your crops going to bow down to my crop, but now the stars are going to bow down to me in my dream. And it gets to the point where his daddy's like, hey boy, you mean I'm going to bow down to you too? And his brothers just didn't like him even more for it. It just he kept on digging his own hole. Right for better or worse, he just kept on telling them. And you know, we can kind of do that with our siblings. Now we talk about, well, I got this, or I got that. You know, my thing's better than yours. And now, is that right to do that to our siblings? No. Now, even as adults, we can still be guilty of that. Whenever somebody pulls up to work with a new truck, they're like, man, I wish I had a new truck. And they come walking in, yeah, look at my new truck. I got it. It cost me this much, and whatever. That can make you upset. So, you know, it's important that when we get blessed by things from God, that we don't go rubbing somebody else's nose too, you know? Alright, so then we move on a few verses later, and verse 12, we see that Joseph's brothers is off taking care of the sheep up in a place called Dothan. It's about 65 miles away. Now, that's a pretty long ways to have to walk. That's how far they push these sheep, and they walk them up there and they're feeding them. And Jacob tells Joseph, he says, go check on them. And then come back and bring a report to him. And remember, he was already kind of like a little supervisor of his brothers. So even though he's doing what his daddy told him to, he's going to check on them. So whenever his brothers see him coming from a long ways off, do you think they were happy? No, they said, look at this dreamer coming. Now, they were upset about him coming on up to them. And whenever they seen him coming, they decided that they were going to kill him. Remember now, they didn't just not like him a little bit. They hated him. And they said they were going to kill him. Alright? And I don't know how bad of a fight you might ever have with your siblings, but it ain't ever worth coming to blood on it, you know? Even fighting. You can ask my siblings. We fought quite a bit growing up, and was it worth it? No, it was never good. Never good. So, you know, if you get in a good shot on one of your siblings, don't go bragging about it. Might get you in trouble for it. But we see the oldest brother, his name was Reuben. Now remember, Reuben, with him being the oldest, should have been, whenever Jacob passed away, should have become the leader of the clan, right? He should have been the boss man. So he had more cause than any of the other brothers to not like Joseph. But whenever he seen him coming, he said, hey y'all, instead of killing, let's just throw him in this pit. And let's just leave him there. And now Reuben had a plan in the back of his mind. He said, whenever they all walk off, he's going to go get Joseph up out of the pit and take him back home. But he didn't tell him that. So he hatched his plan in the back of his mind. But he said, let's just put him in a pit and we'll leave him there. The rest of them like, yeah, let's do that. So they go, when he comes up, they grab a hold of him, they go throw him in this hole. And it was deep enough he couldn't climb out of it. So a little bit more time passes in the verses, and we see these traders come passing by. And Reuben has gone off to go do something else, probably take care of the sheep. The rest of them is sitting around eating. And whenever these traders come by, one of them pops up, hey, let's pull him up out of the hole and let's sell him. So they backed off from wanting to do him bodily harm, but now they're going to sell him because this group of folks that was going down to Egypt. And that's a long ways away from where Jacob's family was. So Joseph would have been long gone. Probably wouldn't have never seen from him again. So they pull him up out of the hole and they sell him to these traders. And then they leave. Well, then Reuben comes back and he realizes what they've done. And it says that he was so upset that he tore his clothes. And because he felt responsible for taking care of Joseph, being the oldest of the clan, being the oldest brother. So even though he might not like him, he still felt responsible for his safety. So, to cover up what they had done, selling Joseph like they did, they took his coat and they ripped it up. I ain't going to rip this one, huh? But they took and ripped it into pieces, and then they took a lamb from the flock, innocent blood, and they killed it. So for their plan to work, it required innocent blood. Now, who do we know was innocent blood that was shed for us? Yeah. So remember, we see kind of a little parallel right there. In order to cover up their sin right there, they had to shed innocent blood of that lamb. And so they dip it in the blood and they carry it home. And they say, Daddy, is this Joseph's coat? Knowing that it was, but they're trying to play dumb. Trying to not let they done it. He said, is this Joseph's coat? And Jacob says, yes, it is. And it breaks his heart. Just like any other, thinking your child's gone, it broke his heart, and he was in mourning for quite some time. And it says that they tried to console him, and he wouldn't have it. He just kept mourning, being sad over it. Well, we flip back over to Joseph, and we see Joseph going on down to Egypt, and he's sold to a man named Potiphar. And that brings us to the end of chapter 37. So now we flip over to chapter 39, okay? In chapter 39, chapter 39 opens up. I don't remember reading, but we don't know how much time passed from the time they left being sold, or Joseph left from being sold into slavery to when he gets to Egypt. But I imagine the trip was pretty tough, because I don't think they let him lie on a bed of roses and get carted down there. Just like whenever your mom and daddy make you work in the yard or do something, you have to manual labor. I'm sure they made Joseph do it. He wasn't carried, and he probably had to walk the whole way, probably carrying heavy chains, and it wasn't a fun time for him. But so he gets down to Egypt, and he is sold to a man named Potiphar. And Potiphar was a powerful man. He was one of the captain of the guards for Pharaoh, which is the king of Egypt. So he ain't just sold to any old regular slave owner. He's sold to somebody who has some influence, somebody who has power. And while he was in slavery to Potiphar, God still blessed Joseph. So just think about it, youngins, whenever y'all are in some kind of situation, whether it be at school and you got this really tough class, or you got a teacher that you don't like, or they may not like you, or if you've got some kids at school being mean to you, you can still be faithful to God.
Amen.
Because even though we don't know how Joseph's attitude was when he was with his brothers, by the time he got to Potiphar's house, he was faithful to God, because it said that God blessed him. And because of God blessing Joseph, Potiphar's house prospered, which means it did really well. Everything that Joseph done for him, it made money, it multiplied, it grew. This man was on it. And because of Potiphar says, you're pretty good at this. Why don't you just take care of everything in my affairs, you know? And it says that Potiphar didn't even know what was going on. All he knew is the bread he ate. You know? So Joseph was doing such a good job. Remember, as a slave now that you know, when you get older and you get a job, sometimes people can get attitudes of, well, I just work. But the Bible tells us to work as if unto the Lord, no matter what you're doing. So like I said, when you're in school, when you're in that class that you don't like, always do your best for it. Or whenever when you come in here and help with the church cleanup. What was it, last weekend? Now, if you come and help with that, still work as hard as you can, doing the best you can, because everything you do is a way to honor Jesus. So we see Joseph still doing his best, and it blesses Potiphar's house in return. And Potiphar puts him in charge of his house. Now, have you ever had anybody, you was doing really good, and you had somebody, might have been a friend, might have been somebody who wasn't your friend. They come up and try to convince you to do something bad. Y'all ever had that? Might have been, for adults, it might be a coworker, or once again, a family member, anybody. Well, Potiphar's wife tried to convince Joseph to do something bad, and Joseph kept telling him, no, no, no. Finally, one day, she tries to force him, and she grabs a hold of his coat. Now, this time it wasn't a colorful coat; it was just regular clothes. But she grabbed a hold of his coat, and he said, "I ain't gonna do it. I'm going to honor God." And he run anyway. Left his jacket there. Well, then she realizes, because some of the other servants are coming inside the house. She said, "Oh, what am I going to do? How am I going to explain this coat here? I know what I'm going to tell him. Joseph tried to hurt me. He tried to do something bad." And Potiphar hears of it. He don't ask no questions. He just throws Joseph into prison. Now, do we think that's fair? But life's not fair, is it? There's a lot of things going to happen that you just don't think is fair. But was Joseph still faithful to God?
Yes.
Yes. So even though, so now he's a slave, sold to Potiphar, been working in this man's house, thinking he's doing really good, and all of a sudden now he's thrown into prison. All because somebody accused him of something and nobody asked Joseph's opinion on it. They just called him and threw him in jail. Alright? So that carries us into chapter 40. Okay. So we see Joseph in prison now. And I want to say it was about 28 at this point when chapter 40 opens up. So he was, I didn't mention, he was 17 when we first get introduced to him. So from the time Joseph gets sold into slavery to now, 11 years have passed. We don't exactly know how long it was that before he was sold. We don't know how long he stayed at Potiphar's house, but he's around 28 years old now. And now he's still a young man, but he's not a teenager anymore. And so we see Joseph in prison, and all of a sudden, he gets 2 new prison mates. Let me back up, kids. I forgot to mention. While Joseph was in the prison, he also done so well in there that the captain of the prison put him in charge of the prisoners there as well. So just like we talked about Joseph staying faithful to God, even in his circumstances of being in jail, he was still put in charge of the jail. So just goes to show you, still staying faithful is very important. And that's one of the morals of this story, is to stay faithful to God. So we see, back to chapter 40, that these two new guys get brought into the jail. One of them's the head butler, and the other one's the head baker. And it says that another word for butler back then was a cupbearer. Now, cupbearer was somebody who would bring the king's drink to him and make sure it wasn't poisoned. So the man had to be very trusted. And if any of y'all were in class on Wednesday night with the third through fifth graders, that's something we talked about, was how, like with Nehemiah being the cupbearer of the Artaxerxes, he was very trusted. So now we see here that the butler is a very trusted man, but now he's thrown in prison with Joseph. And then the baker, who was in charge of bacon, he was thrown in prison as well. And it says that with them being such higher up officials in the kingdom in Egypt, that Joseph was assigned to be their servant. Okay? So one morning Joseph gets up and he goes in there to check on them, and he finds them sad. Now, have you ever had dreams that left you sad? You just woke up crying, or woke up in the mully grubs, and you didn't know how to feel about it? Well, that's what happened with these two men. That night, the previous night, they had a dream. Each of them had a dream. And so now we know that Joseph had received 2 dreams from God. And now we see these 2 men have each received a dream each. And so Joseph finds them sad. He said, "Why are you sad?" And the men say, "Well, we've had these dreams, but nobody's here to tell us what they mean." So Joseph tells them, "Man, all dreams are interpreted by God. Tell me what they are, and I'll ask God what they mean." So we see the men tell them, and it picks up chapter 40, verse 5. And they dreamed a dream both of them. Of each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. So skip down to verse 9. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, "In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head, and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand after the former manner when thou wast his butler." So now Joseph's told his dream, he interprets it, telling him it means it's 3 days and you're going to get released. So then we see the baker's like, "Oh man, that's pretty good. That's a good thing. Let me tell you my dream." So the baker then tells him his dream, and Joseph's like, "Yeah man, in 3 days you're going to die." No, your dream ain't all roses like this other man's. And so Joseph, after he interprets his dreams, he asks the butler, he says, "Hey, when you get turned loose, please tell Pharaoh about me." Now, I agree with Joseph. I wouldn't want to stay in prison no more than I actually had to. Because think about it, he's been thrown in prison for something he didn't do. Sold into slavery for something he didn't do. And so he's just asking, he said, "Please, just tell somebody now, because I've been all but forgotten. I'm miles away from home, have no family down here." And I mean, keep in mind, at this time, his family, his daddy thinks he's dead, and his brothers believe he's either dead already or he's been sold into slavery and he's gone for good. Okay? So the butler says, "Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll remember you." So 3 days later, what happens? The butler gets restored and the baker dies. He gets killed, just like Joseph interpreted the dream for him. And what should happen when the butler gets out? But he forgets his old buddy Joseph down in the jailhouse.
Yes.
He forgot all about him.
Yep.
The Bible says, and he forgot him. Now, have y'all ever forgot something important? Mm-hmm. Really, sometimes I've done it lots of times. I have sticky notes all over the place at work. I'll be forgetting stuff all the time. So, the old butler done forgot about Joseph. Until we pick up in chapter 41. All right. Now remember, we had Joseph with 2 dreams in chapter 37. The butler and the baker were the dream each in chapter 40. And now we're in chapter 41. And we got Pharaoh having 2 dreams. Now let me just make a little side note. Them are some sleeping folks. They're dreaming a lot of dreams. And so chapter 41 picks up with And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And it goes to describe the dream that Pharaoh dreamed. It was about seven cows. Yeah, seven, and seven, behold, 7 kine came up after them out of the river. So we had 7 good cows coming out of the river, and then 7 bad cows coming out of the river, and 7 bad cows ate the 7 good cows. Okay? And so then he woke up, went back to sleep, and it said that 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, ranking good, and behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 ranking full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So we got in his dream 2 different dreams. First dream, 7 cows come up out of the river, good, fat, makes a good steak. And then we got 7 old, thin, rangy-looking cows that come out of the water, and they eat the 7 good cows. Pharaoh wakes up and like, what was that? He goes back to sleep. Then he dreams another dream. And then he dreams about 7 big full. How many of y'all like corn on the cob? I'm telling you, with butter and salt on it, good stuff. So we see these 7 big, juicy, nice ears of corn spring up, and then we got these old 7 thin, old spindly ears, and they eat the 7 good ears. The Pharaoh don't know what to make of it. He's at a loss for words. And what does the butler do at that point? After 2 years of being forgot about Joseph, he finally remembers. Hey, there's a man I was in prison with, and I told him a dream, and he interpreted it, and it came true. So Pharaoh says, get him, bring him here. So they go and get him, and bring him out of prison. And it says that, and Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. They wasn't waiting around. Pharaoh done it. Now, and they went and got him. They did it quick. So remember, he'd been forgotten. He wasn't forgotten no more. God finally brought him around. Joseph stayed faithful all those years, and he finally, he was blessed once again. And so Joseph comes up before the Pharaoh, the king, and he hears his dreams, and he tells him, the 7 fat cows and the 7 good ears is 7 years of plenty. It means all the crops, it's going to be a bumper crop every year. You're going to have all the animals and all the corn and all the wheat and whatever else they grew back then. Everything was going to produce a lot of it. And the 7 years after that was going to be 7 years of famine. Who knows what famine means, young kids? You know what famine means? So famine is a time when your crops don't grow, hardly no rain, and a lot of folks starve to death during famines. We still have famine today in the world, places like Asia and Africa, even in South America. Places go through some poor harvest because they don't get no rain or have any other, some kind of pestilence like locusts come through, and they don't have any crops to eat, and people die. So Joseph is telling him, hey, you're going to have 7 really, really good years of harvest, and you're going to have 7 extremely bad years. And what Joseph then told him, what you need to do about it is those 7 years, 7 good years, you need to save up. Build bigger storehouses. Put everything in the storage, keep it protected. Because when those other 7 years hit, there ain't going to be no food to be had anywhere else. Okay? And so, because Joseph interpreting these dreams, Pharaoh's like, hey man, you're going to be in charge now. And so once again, being faithful to God, he was brought back up out of the pit of despair in prison, and he was placed on high. And Joseph then went about making these storehouses. Okay? And he saved up. And then when after the 7 really, really good years passed, the famine hit. Okay? And I forget how severe it got in the first year, or about how long it passed before people started coming to Egypt trying to get food. But because of Joseph's preparation and listening to God and doing what he said, Egypt was sitting pretty on lots of food. As a matter of fact, they had enough food that they could afford to sell it to other people. And so I ain't going to get in on what Brother Bradley's is Bradley next week.
Sure.
I ain't going to get on what he's going to be on next week, but we're going to see where we start having people come into Egypt trying to buy food, okay? And so kind of what I want y'all youngest to remember is, you know, don't be prideful and big-headed whenever God does bless you. Because He'll do things to get your attention. But whenever bad things do happen, stay faithful to God. Because just like with Joseph, he went through being thrown in the pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, sold to Potiphar, thrown in prison, forgot about it in prison for probably a decade, and then finally he made it back out, and he was he was one of the rulers of Egypt. Because he done so well for Pharaoh that Pharaoh made him second or third in command of the whole nation. Now, that's not to say that God's always going to bless you with status and money or some of that. But He will bless you for being faithful to Him. Even if it's just having that joy in your heart, knowing that you're serving God. And that's the important thing to do, is that we don't do stuff for the sake of stuff. We do it to please God. Okay? And so, just like with Joseph, he could have been upset. He could have, God, you don't like me. I'm not going to do anything. But you'll see next week that because he was faithful in his sufferings, he was able to save a certain set of people because he was faithful to God. That's it, yep.
Thank you, Brother Eric.
Yes,
You did a great job, man. You're a remarkable storyteller. You got a great balance between telling enough and making it smooth, man. Let's give him a hand. He did a great job. Hey, kids, remember, listen. Whenever we read these accounts in the Bible, that's not a story like a made-up story. Joseph was a real man. He was a real person. And even when things didn't go his way, he had a good attitude. And so you need to start thinking, we're fixing to have the invitation. So the invitation is for you to think about the things going on in your life, and for you to, think about what God may be dealing with you in the Word, what He said today. So it may be some of you kids maybe out there had a bad attitude last week because something didn't go your way. It might have been you had a bad attitude because your parents didn't let you do something. You might have had a bad attitude because you were jealous of somebody else and what they got. Or maybe you were blessed with a lot and somebody else could have used something and you kept it to yourself. But Joseph was faithful, no matter what situation he was in, to have a good attitude toward God. And that's what we want to try to have. So tonight when we get the invitation, you can come pray and ask God to help you. Whether it's dealing with your brothers and sisters, whether it's dealing with people at church, at work, at school. I keep trying to get school out. Y'all ain't at work yet. You can't drive. But after school, or someone even in your family, or some situation you got going on in your life right now. One thing Joseph did was he prayed. And he stayed close to God. And so tonight, if you're struggling with something, we're going to be down here. If you want to come, if you want me to pray for you, I'd love to pray with you tonight. And this altar is going to be open. So if there's something that God is convicting you about, or something that God was dealing with you about, you can come and ask God to forgive you. And this is really important too, kids, okay? When you can, if it was something to do with somebody else too, you did something to somebody else. It's not just good to come and ask God to forgive you. It's good to go and ask that person to forgive you too. And make it as right as you can with the other people around too. So these are some important lessons. Brother Aaron did a great job teaching us tonight. So let's put them to work down at the altar tonight, okay? Let's stand together as Mark comes and he leads us in some song tonight. And if y'all